But mistakes in logic is what we're focused on here. And so when learning about errors in logical reasoning in order to avoid them, we should be aware that there are also two basic categories of logic. One, inductive, in which a conclusion is likely to be true if the premises are, and two, deductive, in which the conclusion is definitely true if the premises are. There are also two basic types of logical reasoning. One, formal, where the argument can be written symbolically. Deductive logic is often expressed in this formal or symbolic manner. We're going to look more at that next time. And two, informal logic, where the argument cannot be expressed in mere symbols. Jason Lisle lays these categories and types out in his book in more detail, and I direct you there for further review. Right now we're going to jump into the kinds of mistakes made in the informal type of logic, and then in the next and final talk we'll look at formal logic. But in informal logic, there are mistakes that are also called ordinary language fallacies, or mistakes we make in our thinking and speech, in everyday thinking, speaking, and listening to others' reasoning as well. Again, this is all about learning to be faithful to God's Word, like Jesus, in how we think, speak, and hear others. The transforming of our minds by the yielding to the sanctifying of Jesus' Spirit within us, in imitation of Apostle Paul as he imitates Christ, in order to be better ambassadors for Jesus and the gospel of his grace in this world. So believe it or not, this is very practical training we're doing in this course to be more effective Christians in this world. As Jason Lisle puts it, we want to make sure that we use only good argumentation when defending the faith. Anything less would not be honoring to the Lord that we serve. We want to have excellent logic because, one, our thinking is based on the only sound presupposition, which is biblical creation, that Jesus is our creator, just as he says, by which we know the truth with certainty, having a sure foundation for our faith and worldview. And two, by reasoning correctly from that basic presupposition without making errors in our propositions and conclusions. We'll look at three broad groups of mistakes in informal logic: ambiguity, presumption, and relevance. So let's start with fallacies of ambiguity here. The first group of mistakes in logical reasoning, as you can see on the slide, that Christians make, for example, when compromising with evolution in millions or billions of years, are called fallacies of ambiguity. Fallacies of ambiguity are arguments, says Lisle, that are faulty because they use words or phrases that are unclear or have more than one meaning. There are 6 types of ambiguity commonly used: equivocation, amphiboly, accent, reification, composition, and division. We'll look at 2 of these common ones committed by old earth and evolution arguments. First, equivocation, where the meaning of a word is shifted in the course of an argument. For example, the word evolution itself, as we've seen and talked about, is falsely equated with the word science. And actually, in the great debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye, Ken Ham points this out, this common error that's made, and it's done deliberately and insidiously by those who are attacking biblical Christianity. But we can do it ourselves when we're drawn into that error. So there's an equivocation of the words evolution and science, and then those 2 words, science and evolution, are used interchangeably, which is a terrible mistake, as people argue in favor of evolution. This is also called a bait-and-switch tactic. It's dishonest and deceptive. For example, someone says, science is a very powerful tool from which we've developed great technology, so why would Christians deny the science of evolution? Here, operational science is falsely equated with the defunct historical science, that myth of evolution. That's the logical mistake of equivocation. Or because the basic meaning of the word evolution is simply change, so its basic definition, and because evolution has been given the specialized meaning of the idea that all life is descended from a common ancestor, which is that lie of macroevolution, involving the myth of increased information and complexity over time, which has not ever happened and never will. A proponent of evolution will use the word evolution to mean these 2 different things interchangeably, and thus confuse and deceive his hearers. So, for example, someone says, creationists do not believe in evolution, but evolution happens. Every day things change, so it's absurd for creationists to deny evolution. You can see that he's being tricky here. He's conflating 2 things, or equivocating between the change we see every day, which is not macroevolution, is not Darwinian evolution, and that mythological goo to you via the zoo macroevolution, as if they're one and the same thing. So the Christian response should be, I don't accept your conclusion because you've got a false proposition, a false presupposition, which is that evolution and change, or evolution and science, are the same thing. They're not. Now, how about the fallacy of ambiguity called reification, as you see on the slide? Lisle writes that this mistake is made when a person attributes a concrete and often personal characteristic to a conceptual abstraction. Examples include referring to the universe, to creation, or the earth as Mother Nature, as a person or a sentient thinking being, which does not correspond with reality. It's a lie, and it's an animistic fallacy that leads to idolatry, yet this error is mainstream today. I hear someone speak this way at least once a week. Or someone will say, nature selects those individuals who are most fit, but nature has neither mind nor choice and thus cannot literally select anything. Or they'll say, evolution figured out how to get around these problems, or life finds a way. Evolution and life writ large are not minds that think and solve problems. Such personification of abstractions is erroneous thinking. It's people claiming to be talking science and talking sense when they're really talking myth. An old pagan nature-worshipping religion is what they're really describing when they speak that way. Or they'll say, science is atheistic in its outlook and procedures. Science has no beliefs about God or anything. It doesn't have an outlook. And of course, they say, as we often hear, the evidence speaks for itself. Yeah, right. Talking evidence, really. Evidence is interpreted by actual thinking sentient beings, Adam's race, you and me. And evidence is always interpreted through the glasses of our preconceived beliefs, our presuppositions. Evidence itself is not an unbiased witness to its own origins and past. To suggest such is the reification fallacy, is an error. So the ambiguity or confusion is obviously caused by attributing characteristics of a will, a mind, a personality to either abstract or inanimate things, and then claiming that these beings, so-called, support evolution in some way. It's a surprisingly pagan and animistic thing to do, and yet so common and mainstream today that we often don't see it for what it is.